The morning sun beat down on Fort Bridger's main firing range with the kind of intensity that made the air shimmer above the packed earth. Rows of bleachers lined the observation area where officers and enlisted personnel gathered for what General Harwick had promised would be a demonstration worth remembering. The target stood so far downrange that most people needed binoculars just to confirm it existed at all, a small dark square against the pale hills that marked the edge of the training grounds. Corporal Vera Castellanos sat 3 rows back, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes tracking the movements of the men who clustered near the firing line. She had pulled her dark hair into a regulation bun that morning, the same as every morning, and wore the same carefully neutral expression she had perfected over 18 months on this base. Around her, soldiers traded predictions and placed informal bets on who would nail the shot first. For 1,000 meters, the number rippled through the crowd like electricity through water. General Harwick stood near the range tower, his weathered face impassive as his second-in-command set up the optics equipment that would verify any successful hits. The general had made his challenge clear during the morning briefing. He wanted sharpshooters, real ones, the kind who could make impossible shots when everything depended on it. Before we continue with this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Maybe you have witnessed similar moments of unexpected skill where you are from, where someone surprised everyone around them. Sergeant Kozlowski stepped up to the line first, all confidence and broad shoulders. He had won the battalion marksmanship competition 3 years running and made sure everyone knew it. He settled into position with practiced ease, his breathing controlled, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. The crowd fell silent. The first shot cracked across the range, sharp and clear in the dry air. 30 seconds passed while the spotters checked the target through their scopes. Mississippi clean miss by 3 meters left. Kozlowski frowned but reset himself, made an adjustment, and fired again. Another miss, this time high and right. Murmurs rippled through the observers. He took 3 more shots, each one failing to connect with a distant target, before stepping back with his jaw tight and his face flushed. Lieutenant Morales went next, then Staff Sergeant Shun, then Corporal Briggs. One after another they approached the line with varying degrees of confidence, and one after another their bullets failed to find their mark. The count climbed. 7 attempts. 8. 9. The general's expression never changed, but something in his stillness suggested disappointment that cut deeper than anger ever could. Vera watched each shooter with the kind of attention that most people reserve for much closer things. She noted how Briggs pulled slightly right on every trigger squeeze, how Morales failed to account for the thermal currents that rose from the sun-baked earth, how Chun rushed his breathing between shots. Small tells, tiny mechanical failures that added up to misses measured in meters. Specialist Durant swaggered to the line next, making a show of rolling his shoulders and cracking his neck. He glanced back at his buddies and grinned. "This is how it is done, gentlemen," he announced. "Watch and learn." He fired once, twice, 3 times. All misses. His grin evaporated like water on hot stone. 12 attempts now. 12 failures. General Harwick finally moved, stepping closer to the firing line with his hands clasped behind his back. His voice carried across the range without needing amplification. "Any sharpshooters here?" he asked, or did I waste my morning setting this up? The question hung in the air, heavy with challenge and disappointment. Men shifted in their seats. A few looked at their boots. Vera remained perfectly still, her eyes moving from the general to the distant target and back again. She could feel the wind, slight but present, moving right to left at perhaps 6 miles per hour. She could see the heat shimmer that would bend light and trajectory. She could measure the distance in her mind with the kind of precision that came from years of practice in places these soldiers had never heard of. "Someone should try from the prone position," a voice called out. "Maybe kneeling is throwing everyone off." General Harwick shook his head. "The position is not the problem," he said. "The skill is the problem. 13 chances and not 1 hit. This is unacceptable." His words landed like hammer blows. This was supposed to be an elite unit, a place where the best came to prove they belonged among the best. Instead, they had demonstrated nothing except overconfidence and underperformance. The general turned to scan the crowd, his gaze moving across faces until it landed on Vera, lingered for just a moment, then moved on. She let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The silence stretched uncomfortable and thick across the firing range. Nobody wanted to volunteer after watching 13 consecutive failures play out in front of the general and half the base personnel. Vera could see the calculations happening in real time on the faces around her. Step forward and miss, become the 14th failure. Stay seated and avoid the risk entirely. Private Hendricks muttered something to the soldier next to him, his voice low but not quite low enough. Maybe we need to bring in the Marines, he said. Army clearly cannot handle it. A few nervous laughs rippled through the section where he sat. General Harwick's head turned slightly toward the sound, but he said nothing, which somehow made it worse than if he had responded. Vera felt the weight of her own stillness. She had spent 18 months on this base, perfecting the art of being overlooked, of being present but not noticed, of completing her administrative duties with efficiency that drew no attention. She filed reports. She maintained records. She showed up on time and left when dismissed. The other soldiers knew her name only because it appeared on the duty roster. To them, she was furniture, part of the landscape, as unremarkable as the filing cabinets in the records office. But 4,000 meters. The distance pulled at something deep in her chest, something she had carefully buried under layers of deliberate mediocrity. She knew that distance. She had made shots from that range and further in places where missing meant something far more permanent than embarrassment. Her fingers flexed once against her thigh, muscle memory trying to surface through sheer force of habit. General Harwick checked his watch and shook his head. He turned to Major Reeves, who stood beside the range equipment. "Pack it up," he said. "Clearly we have overestimated the capabilities present today." His disappointment carried more weight than shouting ever could. This was a general who had built his reputation on finding excellence and pushing it further. This morning had shown him something else entirely. Major Reeves nodded and began giving instructions to the range assistants. Soldiers in the bleachers started gathering their gear, relief and shame mixing on their faces in equal measure. The demonstration was over. The challenge remained unmet. In the debriefing that would follow, hard questions would be asked about training protocols and standards. Vera stood up. The movement was automatic, driven by something older than her current assignment, older than her carefully constructed invisibility. She made her way down the bleacher steps, her boots making soft sounds against the metal that seemed loud in the unusual quiet. Heads turned. Eyes followed. Someone snickered, but cut it off quickly. She walked past the rows of observers, past the knot of failed marksmen who stood near their rifles looking anywhere except at each other, and stopped 3 paces from where General Harwick stood consulting with Major Reeves. She waited, hands at her sides, until the general noticed her presence and turned. "Yes, Corporal," he said. His tone was not unkind, but carried the weariness of a morning wasted on disappointment. "Sir," Vera said, "permission to attempt a shot." The words landed like stones in still water. Major Reeves stopped mid-sentence. Sergeant Kozlowski actually laughed out loud, a sharp bark of sound that he did not bother to hide. Durant shook his head and muttered something about desperation. Even some of the soldiers still in the bleachers reacted, whispers spreading like wind through dry grass. General Harwick studied her face for a long moment. His eyes were sharp, the kind that had seen too much combat to be easily fooled. "You are Corporal Castellanos," he said. "Records office." "Yes, sir." "You qualified with your rifle during basic training." "I do not recall seeing any advanced marksmanship certifications in your file." "No, sir," Vera said. "There would not be any." The general glanced past her at the distant target, then back. "This is 4,000 meters, Corporal. Trained marksmen with years of experience just failed 13 consecutive attempts. What makes you think you can succeed where they could not?" It was not quite a question, but Vera answered anyway. "I would like to try, sir." Kozlowski stepped forward, his face still flushed from his own failures. "General, with respect, this is a waste of time. She works in records. She probably has not touched her rifle since qualifying 2 years ago. This is not a participation trophy situation." The general held up one hand, and Kozlowski fell silent. The gesture was economical, almost casual, but carried absolute authority. Harwick continued to study Vera with an expression that gave away nothing. Around them the range had gone quiet again, everyone watching this unexpected development, waiting to see how it would play out. Major Reeves leaned closer to the general and spoke quietly. "Sir, we have already spent considerable time on this. Perhaps we should move on to the other scheduled demonstrations. 4,000 meters is not a distance for amateurs," Durant added, loud enough for everyone to hear. "No offense to the corporal, but this is embarrassing enough already." Vera kept her eyes on General Harwick and waited. She had learned patience in places where impatience cost lives. She could wait as long as necessary. The general looked at her for another few seconds, some calculation happening behind his weathered features that she could not quite read. "Very well," he said finally. "One attempt, Corporal. Make it count." The murmurs started immediately, a mixture of disbelief and second-hand embarrassment. Someone in the bleachers groaned audibly. Kozlowski shook his head and stepped back, his expression making clear what he thought of this decision. Durant actually turned away, as if he could not bear to watch what was about to happen. Vera moved to the firing line. Major Reeves directed her to the rifle, the same weapon that 13 others had used with identical lack of success. She picked it up with hands that remembered this weight, this balance, this particular distribution of metal and purpose. The rifle felt both familiar and strange, like a language she had once spoken fluently but had not used in years. She checked the rifle with movements that were economical and precise, running through the mechanical verification that her hands knew better than any conscious thought. The weight distribution was slightly off from what she had trained with years ago, but not so different that it mattered. Metal was metal. Physics was physics. 4,000 meters was 4,000 meters regardless of the particular weapon in her hands. Vera settled into a kneeling position at the firing line, feeling the packed earth solid beneath her. The murmurs behind her continued, soldiers making predictions about how far off her shot would be, whether she would even hit the hillside behind the target. She filtered the noise out the way she had learned to filter out everything that did not contribute to the immediate task. There was only the rifle, the target, the wind, the distance. Major Reeves moved to stand beside General Harwick, both men watching with different expressions. The major looked vaguely uncomfortable, as if he wished this entire situation would resolve itself quickly so they could move on. The general watched with that same calculating stillness, his face revealing nothing but his attention absolute. "She's going to pull left," Kozlowski said to Durant, keeping his voice just loud enough to be heard. "Textbook beginner mistake. Watch." Durant nodded. "If she even gets close enough to see where it hits, I will be impressed," he replied. 4,000 meters is not something you just figure out on the spot. Vera ignored them. She had learned to ignore far worse distractions and circumstances far more pressing than hurt pride on a training range. Her breathing settled into the pattern that lived somewhere deeper than memory, the rhythm that turned her body into a stable platform and her mind into nothing but calculation and intent. She felt the wind on her face, measured its pressure and direction. 6 miles per hour, maybe 7, moving right to left with occasional gusts that pushed it higher. The temperature had climbed since the morning briefing. Heat shimmer rose from the ground between her position and the target, bending light and playing tricks with distance. She compensated automatically, making adjustments that came from experience rather than conscious thought. The elevation change was minimal, perhaps 15 meters over the full distance, but it mattered. Everything mattered at this range. Her finger rested on the trigger with just enough pressure to feel the mechanism without engaging it. She had not held a rifle with serious intent in 18 months. Since arriving at Fort Bridger, she had avoided the range, avoided anything that might draw attention to skills that were supposed to stay buried. She had an agreement, with people who did not appreciate broken agreements. Stay quiet, stay invisible, stay unremarkable. That was the deal. But 4,000 meters. The distance called to her like a challenge that transcended whatever arrangement she had made with her past. Some things went deeper than operational security, deeper than carefully maintained cover stories. Some things were carved into muscle and bone and could not be denied forever. She exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder with familiar force. The sound cracked across the range, sharp and singular. Then came the waiting, those few seconds that stretched longer than they should while the bullet traveled its arc through heat and wind and distance. Vera did not move. She held her position, her eyes still to the scope, watching the target through the magnification. At the spotting station, a specialist named Torres had his eye pressed to the high-powered scope mounted on his tripod. His job was to track impacts and call out results. He had done this for all 13 previous attempts, announcing each miss with growing resignation. Now he watched the target, waiting for the telltale dust kick or hillside impact that would mark another failure. His body went very still. He blinked, looked again, then reached for his radio. "Hit," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying confusion more than confirmation. "Center mass. Confirmed hit at 4,000 meters. The silence that followed was different from all the silences that had come before. This one had weight and texture, thick with disbelief and the sudden need to recalibrate everything that had seemed certain just moments earlier. Someone in the bleachers said, "That is impossible." Someone else demanded verification. Major Reeves moved quickly to the spotting scope, shouldering Torres aside to see for himself. Vera lowered the rifle and stood, her movements calm and controlled. She felt the adrenaline trying to surface, but kept it contained through sheer force of practiced discipline. The shot had been good, better than good, exactly where she had intended it. But she had known it would be before Torres confirmed it. She had felt the perfection of the moment when her finger completed its squeeze, had known from the rifle's recoil and the fractional instant of bullet departure that everything had aligned exactly as it needed to. General Harwick walked to the spotting station, his stride measured and purposeful. He looked through the scope himself, taking his time, verifying what his officers were telling him. When he straightened and turned back toward the firing line, his expression had shifted into something harder to read. Not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it. Recognition maybe, or suspicion. Kozlowski stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. Durant had turned back around and now stared at Vera like she had materialized from nowhere, doing something that violated fundamental laws of nature. Other soldiers leaned forward in the bleachers, craning to see better, try to understand what had just happened. Major Reeves cleared his throat. "The shot is confirmed, sir," he said to the general. "Clean hit, center target." General Harwick nodded slowly. He walked back toward Vera, his eyes never leaving her face. When he stopped in front of her, she came to attention automatically, rifle held properly, her posture correct and unremarkable once again. The general studied her for a long moment before speaking. "That was an exceptional shot, Corporal," he said. His tone carried layers she could not quite parse. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Basic training, sir," Vera said. "Standard qualification course." The general's eyes narrowed slightly. "Standard qualification does not teach 4,000-meter marksmanship, Corporal. That requires specialized training. Advanced courses, the kind that leave documentation and certification." "I practice sometimes, sir," Vera said. "On my own time." "With respect," Kozlowski interjected, "nobody gets that good practicing on their own. That shot was professional grade. That was operator-level work." Vera said nothing. She had learned that silence could be its own kind of defense, that sometimes the best response was no response at all. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. As long as they did not dig too deep, as long as they did not start making calls to the wrong offices, she could weather their confusion. General Harwick continued to watch her with an intensity that made the space between them feel smaller than it was. Around them the range had erupted into quiet chaos, soldiers talking over each other, theories bouncing back and forth like ricochets. But the general's focus never wavered from Vera's face, as if he could extract truth through sustained observation alone. "Corporal Castellanos," he said finally, "report to my office at 1400 hours. We're going to have a more detailed conversation about your background and qualifications." "Yes, sir," Vera replied. Her voice remained steady, but something cold settled in her chest. Detailed conversations were exactly what she had spent 18 months avoiding. Detailed conversations led to phone calls and record checks and questions asked to people who would not appreciate those questions. The general turned to Major Reeves. "Continue with the rest of the day's schedule," he said, "and get that target verified properly. I want measurements, photographic documentation, everything by the book." "Sir, should we have the corporal attempt additional shots?" Reeves asked, to confirm this was not an anomaly. General Harwick glanced back at Vera, then shook his head. "One shot at 4,000 meters tells me everything I need to know," he said. "That level of precision does not happen by accident." He walked away toward the command building, his posture rigid with purpose. Vera watched him go and felt the wall she had carefully constructed beginning to show cracks. She had made a mistake. A spectacular, undeniable, for 1,000-meter mistake. The smart thing would have been to stay seated, to let the demonstration end in failure, to maintain her carefully cultivated irrelevance. Instead, she had stepped forward and fired a shot that raised every question she could not afford to answer. Major Reeves approached her, his expression uncertain. He took the rifle from her hands with more care than necessary, as if it had transformed into something significant during the few minutes she had held it. "Impressive shooting, Corporal," he said. "Very impressive. Where did you serve before Fort Bridger?" "Just here, sir," Vera said. "This is my first permanent posting after basic." Reeves looked skeptical, but nodded. "Well," he said, "the general will want to know more about your training this afternoon. I suggest you prepare for a thorough discussion." "Yes, sir." She turned to leave and found her path blocked by Kozlowski and Durant, both men wearing expressions that mixed resentment with unwilling respect. Durant spoke first, his voice lower than before, less confident. "That was one hell of a shot," he admitted. "I have been shooting competitively for 8 years, and I could not make that shot on my best day." "Thank you," Vera said. She tried to move past, but Kozlowski shifted to keep himself in her path. "Where did you really learn to shoot like that?" he asked. "And do not give us the basic training story. That was professional work. Specialist level at minimum. Maybe higher." "I got lucky," Vera said. "Wind conditions were favorable." Kozlowski shook his head. "Nobody gets that lucky. 4,000 meters requires knowledge of ballistics, environmental compensation, trigger control that takes years to develop. You want us to believe you just figured all that out filing paperwork in the records office." "Believe what you want," Vera said. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have duties to return to." She moved past them before they could press further. Behind her, the conversation continued. Kozlowski and Durant and others speculating, building theories, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. Let them speculate. Speculation was manageable. Documentation was another matter entirely. The general's order to report to his office carried weight that went beyond simple curiosity about an unexpected talent. Vera walked back across the base toward the records building, her stride measured and even. The morning heat pressed down from a cloudless sky. Other soldiers she passed looked at her differently now, their eyes tracking her movement with interest instead of sliding past like she was part of the scenery. Word traveled fast on military bases. By lunchtime, everyone would know about the shot. By dinner, the story would have grown details that never happened. By tomorrow, it would be legend. The records office was blessedly empty when she arrived. Specialist Park, who usually worked the morning shift, had taken leave to visit family, which meant Vera had the space to herself. She sat at her desk and stared at the computer screen without really seeing it. Her hands had begun to tremble slightly, delayed reaction finally catching up now that she was alone and unobserved. She had spent 5 years in a world that did not officially exist, taking shots from distances that would have seemed impossible to most people, completing missions that never made it into any official record. Then came the operation that went wrong in ways that still gave her nightmares. Extraction under fire. 3 teammates dead. classified information compromised, and the agreement she had made to disappear, to become somebody else entirely, somebody forgettable and unremarkable who filed papers and stayed invisible. The agreement had been clear. Maintain low profile, draw no attention, exhibit no specialized skills. In exchange, certain uncomfortable questions about the failed operation would remain unasked. Certain career-ending investigations would quietly close without findings. She could serve out her time, collect her benefits, and eventually separate from service with an honorable discharge and a future that did not include prison. One shot for 1,000 meters. She might as well have fired a flare directly at everyone who had agreed to let her fade into obscurity. Her desk phone rang, the sound sharp in the quiet office. She stared at it for 2 rings before picking up. Records office, Corporal Castellanos speaking. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, a man with a slight accent that suggested origin somewhere in the Northeast. Corporal, this is Agent Vance with the Defense Intelligence Agency. I need to speak with you about an incident that occurred at the firing range this morning. Vera's blood went cold. Did you? Of course. Exceptional performance by someone who was supposed to be ordinary would trigger automatic flags in certain databases. Algorithms designed to catch anomalies would highlight her name. People who were paid to notice inconsistencies would notice. I'm not sure what you are referring to, sir, she said carefully. A 4,000-meter shot confirmed by multiple witnesses, including a general officer, Agent Vance said. That kind of marksmanship does not appear spontaneously in someone with no documented advanced training. So either you have training that somehow got left out of your official file, or you're someone who should not be making shots like that. Either way, we need to have a conversation. I have a meeting with General Harwick at 1400 hours, Vera said. Perhaps you should coordinate with his office. Oh, I will, Agent Vance replied. But I wanted to speak with you first, before you have time to prepare a story. Tell me, Corporal, have you ever operated under a different name? Different service record, perhaps? No, sir. The pause that followed was heavy with disbelief. We will be seeing each other soon, Corporal Castellanos, he said. Very soon. And when we do, I suggest you prepare better answers than the ones you're giving me now. The line went dead before Vera could respond. She sat holding the phone for several seconds after the dial tone began, her mind racing through scenarios and calculations. Agent Vance knew something, or suspected something, which meant other people also knew or suspected. The careful isolation she had maintained was dissolving with every passing minute. The shot had done more than hit a distant target. It had illuminated her like a spotlight in a room she had been hiding in for 18 months. She replaced the phone in its cradle and forced herself to breathe slowly. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. Panic led to mistakes, and mistakes led to consequences she had worked very hard to avoid. She needed to think clearly, to assess the situation with the same cold precision she had once applied to mission planning in places where errors meant body bags. The obvious move was to run. Pack a bag, take her personally owned vehicle, drive until she crossed state lines, and then keep driving. Disappear into the vast, anonymous spaces of America where nobody asked questions if you paid cash and kept to yourself. She had done it before, could do it again. But running would confirm every suspicion, would transform curiosity into certainty, and send people looking for her who were very good at finding people who did not want to be found. The alternative was to stay, face the questions, and try to maintain the story she had built. Claim the shot was luck amplified by favorable conditions. Stick to the basic training narrative. Play dumb and unremarkable. Hope that without concrete proof of who she really was, they would eventually lose interest and move on. It was thinner than she liked, but it might work if she played it correctly. Her computer monitor flickered with the screensaver, an abstract pattern of shifting colors that meant nothing. She had personnel files to update, transfer orders to process, the mundane administrative work that filled her days with blessed tedium. But she could not focus on any of it now. Her mind kept returning to that moment on the firing line, to the feel of the trigger and the perfect arc of the shot, and the satisfaction that came from doing something she was genuinely excellent at after months of deliberate mediocrity. That satisfaction was dangerous. It reminded her of who she used to be, of capabilities she was supposed to have buried. Some part of her had wanted to take that shot not despite the risk, but because of it, had needed to prove that 18 months behind a desk had not erased the skills that defined her. Pride was a weakness she could not afford. Pride got people killed, or worse. The office door opened, and Specialist Park walked in carrying a folder and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "Vera," he said, "everyone is talking about what you did at the range. For 1,000 meters on the first try. That is insane. Just got lucky with the conditions," Vera said automatically. Park shook his head. "That is not what the guys who were there are saying. They're saying you made it look easy. Like you could do it again blindfolded." He paused, studying her face. "Is it true you have a meeting with General Harwick this afternoon?" "Yes. He wants to discuss the shot." "Man," Park said, dropping into his own desk chair. "If I could shoot like that, I would be bragging to everyone. You've been here over a year, and nobody knew you had that kind of skill. How did you keep that quiet?" "I did not talk much about my personal abilities," Vera said. "I prefer to focus on my assigned duties." That sounded weak, even to her own ears, but Park seemed to accept it. He turned to his computer and began logging in, still shaking his head in amazement. "Well," he said, "you're definitely going to be famous around here now. The corporal who showed up, all the marksmen. That is going to be a story people tell for years." Vera said nothing. Famous was the last thing she needed to be. Famous meant attention, and attention meant scrutiny, and scrutiny meant someone eventually finding the gaps in her official record, the places where months had been explained away with vague cover stories that would not hold up under serious investigation. She needed to be a footnote, not a story. Forgettable, not legendary. The morning crawled past with agonizing slowness. She processed paperwork with mechanical efficiency, her hands completing tasks while her mind ran through every possible angle of the afternoon's meeting. General Harwick was not a fool. He had recognized something in her shot that went beyond luck. The question was how much he would push, how deeply he would dig, and whether his curiosity would trigger chains of inquiry that led to places she could not allow them to reach. At 13:30 hours, she left the records office and walked across the base toward the command building. The day had grown hotter, the sun beating down with relentless intensity. Soldiers she passed looked at her with new interest, some nodding in acknowledgement, others openly staring. She kept her face neutral and her pace steady, giving them nothing to read beyond what they already knew. The command building was mercifully air-conditioned, the temperature drop immediate and welcome. She reported to the reception desk, where a sergeant she did not know directed her to wait in a small conference room on the second floor. General Harwick would be with her shortly, the sergeant said. "Help yourself to water." The conference room held a table that could seat 8, though only 3 chairs were currently arranged around it. A whiteboard occupied one wall, clean and unmarked. The opposite wall displayed photographs of previous base commanders going back decades, stern faces in dress uniforms marking the progression of time and authority. Vera sat in one of the chairs facing the door and waited. 1,400 hours came and went. She used the time to center herself, to rehearse answers that would satisfy without revealing, to prepare for questions she knew were coming. Stay calm. Stay consistent. Give them nothing they can use to pull the thread that unravels everything. At 14:15, the door opened. General Harwick entered first, his expression unreadable. Behind him came a man in civilian clothes, mid-40s with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that assessed everything they touched. He moved with the controlled awareness of someone trained to notice details and threats, to read body language and microexpressions. Agent Vance, Vera guessed before he even opened his mouth to introduce himself. "Corporal Castellanos," General Harwick said. "This is Agent Thomas Vance from the Defense Intelligence Agency. He has some questions about your background and this morning's demonstration." Agent Vance moved to sit across from her, his movements economical and precise. "Thank you for meeting with us, Corporal," he said. His tone was professional but carried an edge that suggested the meeting was not optional regardless of how he phrased it. "I have to say, your performance this morning was quite remarkable. 4,000 meters is a distance that very few shooters can manage reliably. In fact, according to our databases, there are fewer than 200 active military personnel with documented capability at that range." Vera met his eyes without flinching. "I had favorable conditions, sir." Agent Vance smiled slightly. Favorable conditions do not teach trigger discipline, ballistic compensation, or the kind of environmental reading required for that shot. Those skills come from extensive training and practice. Yet your file shows only basic rifle qualification and no advanced marksmanship courses. He leaned forward slightly. "So help me understand, Corporal, where exactly did you learn to shoot like a Tier 1 operator when your official record says you are a records clerk?" The question hung in the air between them, sharp and precise as the shot that had brought her to this room. Vera kept her expression neutral, her posture relaxed but not casual. She had been interrogated before by people far more hostile than Agent Vance, in circumstances far more dangerous than an air-conditioned conference room on a military base. The key was to give enough truth to seem cooperative while revealing nothing that mattered. "My father was a competitive shooter, sir," Vera said. "He taught me growing up. I have been shooting since I was 12 years old. When you practice something for that long, you develop instincts." Agent Vance tilted his head slightly. "Your father," he repeated. "That would be Miguel Castellanos, deceased 8 years ago. Former Army, served in the Gulf War, received an honorable discharge in '96. He glanced at a folder he had brought with him, flipping through pages. "I see he did receive some marksmanship awards during his service, but nothing that suggests the level of expertise required to train someone to your demonstrated capability." "He was very good," Vera said, "better than his records showed. He trained me well." General Harwick had been watching the exchange in silence, his arms crossed, his expression thoughtful. "If your father trained you to that level, Corporal, why did you not pursue advanced marksmanship training in the military? Why take a position in records administration when you clearly have abilities that would be valuable in other specialties?" "I prefer administrative work, sir," Vera said. "Less complicated." Vance leaned back in his chair and studied her with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. "Less complicated," he said. "That is an interesting choice of words. You know what I find complicated, Corporal? I find it complicated that your name runs through our databases without any significant hits except for routine background checks. I find it complicated that someone with your skill set has somehow remained completely invisible to anyone who recruits for specialized programs. I find it very complicated that you made a shot this morning that fewer than 200 people in the entire military could make, yet you have spent 18 months filing paperwork." Vera said nothing. Sometimes silence was the strongest defense, the refusal to fill empty space with explanations that could be picked apart and examined for inconsistencies. She held Agent Vance's gaze and waited. General Harwick moved to sit at the head of the table, positioning himself between them. "Corporal," he said, his voice carrying a different quality than before, something almost gentle. "I have been in the military for 32 years. I have worked with Rangers, Special Forces, Marine Scout Snipers, Navy SEALs. I know what elite marksmanship looks like. What you did this morning was not luck, and it was not the result of backyard practice with your father. That was professional grade shooting." He paused. "Now, I do not know what your story is, and I do not know why you are hiding your capabilities. But I need to know if you represent a security concern. Are you who your file says you are?" "Yes, sir," Vera said. "I am Corporal Vera Castellanos. Everything in my official record is accurate." Agent Vance shook his head. "Everything in your official record is minimal," he said. "There are gaps, periods where your location is accounted for, but your activities are described in the vaguest possible terms. Training exercises that are not further specified. Temporary duty assignments with no detailed reports. For someone who has supposedly spent her entire military career in administrative roles, you have a file that reads like someone scrubbed it clean of anything specific." "Those records reflect my actual service," Vera said. "If they seem minimal, it is because my duties have been routine." The agent opened his folder and pulled out a photograph. He slid it across the table toward her. "Do you recognize this person?" he asked. Vera looked at the photograph without touching it. The image showed a woman in tactical gear, face partially obscured by equipment and distance, photographed from what looked like surveillance footage. The quality was poor, the resolution grainy, but something about the posture and build was familiar in a way that made her stomach tighten. "No, sir," she said. "I do not recognize that person. That photograph was taken 3 years ago in Syria," Vance said, "during an operation to extract a high-value intelligence asset from a compromised position. The woman in that photo made a shot from approximately 3,800 meters that eliminated a hostile target and allowed the extraction to succeed. The operation was successful, but 3 members of the team were killed during exfiltration." He tapped the photograph. "We never identified this shooter. She was not part of the official team roster. As far as our records show, she does not exist." Vera kept her face carefully blank. 3 years ago, she had been in Syria. 3 years ago, she had made exactly the shot Vance was describing. 3 years ago, her team had been ambushed during exfiltration, and she had watched friends die while she provided covering fire that bought seconds and minutes that were not enough. "I do not know anything about that," she said. General Harwick was watching her with an expression that suggested he was seeing something he had suspected but not wanted to confirm. "Corporal," he said quietly, "if you were involved in classified operations, if you have experience that is not reflected in your official file, this is the time to say so. We can arrange for proper clearances, proper verification. But if you continue to deny something that is becoming increasingly obvious, you put us all in a difficult position." "Sir, with respect, I have told you the truth," Varys said. "I'm a records clerk who made a good shot under favorable conditions. If that seems suspicious, I apologize, but I cannot confess to things I did not do just because they seem more plausible than the actual explanation." Agent Vance gathered his materials and stood. "Corporal," he said, "I'm going to be very direct with you. I do not believe anything you have told us today. I think you're someone with specialized training who is operating under a cover identity, and I think that shot this morning was a catastrophic failure of operational discipline." He moved toward the door. "I'm going to find out who you really are. And when I do, we're going to have a much longer conversation about why you are hiding and who authorized it." He left without waiting for a response. The door closed with a soft click that sounded final. General Harwick remained seated, studying Vera with an expression that mixed frustration with something that might have been sympathy. "Off the record, Corporal," he said, "are you in some kind of trouble? Because if you are, if there is something happening that I should know about, I can help. But only if you trust me enough to tell me the truth." "Sir, I appreciate your concern," Vera said, "but there is nothing to tell. I made a good shot. That is all that happened." The general nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he accepted nothing. "You are dismissed, Corporal," he said, "but this is not over. Agent Vance is going to keep digging, and eventually he's going to find whatever you are hiding. When that happens, I hope you have better answers than the ones you gave today." "Yes, sir." She stood, came to attention, and left the conference room. Her legs felt unsteady, but she kept her stride even and measured. Behind her, she could feel the weight of General Harwick's gaze, the calculation happening in his mind, the slow assembly of pieces that would eventually form a picture she could not allow him to see. The hallway outside was empty, the afternoon heat pressing against windows that overlooked the parade ground. She walked toward the exit, each step carrying her further from the interrogation, but not from its implications. Agent Vance had the photograph. He had the timeline. He had enough pieces to start connecting dots that led directly to operations that officially never happened and people who officially did not exist. She had hours, maybe days, before the investigation escalated beyond questions and into active surveillance. Before her phone was tapped and her movements tracked and her entire life examined under the kind of scrutiny that would crack her cover story like cheap glass. She needed to make a decision and make it soon. Stay and hope the old agreements held enough weight to shut down Vance's investigation. Or run and accept whatever consequences came from breaking those agreements herself. She made it back to her barracks room without encountering anyone who wanted to ask questions. The room was small and sparse, regulation furniture and minimal personal effects that could be packed in under an hour if necessary. She had learned to live light, to keep nothing that could not be abandoned on short notice. The habit had served her well in the past, and might serve her again soon. Vera sat on the edge of her bunk and pulled out her personal phone, the one that was not issued by the military and therefore not as easily monitored. She had one number stored in memory that was not written down anywhere, a contact that existed only in her head and could connect her to people who had arranged her current situation. She had been told to use it only in absolute emergency. This qualified. The number rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered. Delta Foxtrot, the voice said. No greeting, no identification, just a code phrase that confirmed she had reached the right place. Sierra November, Vera replied, giving her own authentication. I have a situation that requires immediate assessment. Stand by. The line went silent, but remained connected. Vera waited, counting her heartbeats, feeling the minutes stretch. Somewhere a database was being queried, her identity verified, her current status checked against whatever records the people on the other end maintained. Finally, the voice returned, different now, a man's voice that carried authority and carefully controlled concern. Castellanos, he said, you were told to maintain zero profile. What happened? I was at a demonstration this morning, Vera said. Long-range marksmanship. The general issued a challenge. I made a shot I should not have made. How long range? For 1,000 meters. The pause that followed told her everything. When the voice came back, it was colder, harder. That was exceptionally stupid, he said. That was the exact opposite of zero profile. Do you understand what you have done? Sir, I understand, but the shot is not the biggest problem now. Defense Intelligence Agency is investigating. Agent named Vance. He has a photograph from Syria. He connected the timeline. Another pause, longer this time. She could hear keyboard sounds in the background, someone accessing files and checking records. The voice returned with an edge that cut. Agent Thomas Vance is persistent and competent. If he is already connecting Syria to your current posting, then your cover is compromised beyond repair. You need to extract immediately. Extract to where? Vera asked. The agreement was that I stay quiet and serve out my time. If I run now, that agreement is void. Everything comes down. The agreement assumed you would maintain operational discipline, the voice said. You failed that assumption the moment you picked up a rifle this morning. The situation has changed. We are initiating emergency protocols. There is a safe house in Albuquerque. Address will be sent to your phone via encrypted message within the hour. You will receive new documentation and assignment. Pack only essentials and leave tonight. What about General Harwick? Vera said. He's asking questions too. If I disappear, he will escalate. General Harwick is a problem we will handle, the voice said. Your only concern is getting clear of Fort Bridger before Vance puts surveillance on you. Once that happens, extraction becomes exponentially more complicated. He paused. Castellanos, do you understand the situation? Your cover is burnt. The shot this morning lit you up across every threat assessment algorithm in the intelligence community. People are asking questions we spent considerable resources ensuring they would never ask. You need to disappear again, and this time you need to stay disappeared. Understood, Vera said quietly. The line went dead. She sat holding the phone, staring at nothing, processing the cascade of consequences that had begun with a single perfect shot. 4,000 meters had seemed like such a simple distance when she was kneeling at the firing line. Now, it represented the gap between the life she had built and the chaos that was about to consume it. Her phone buzzed 10 minutes later with an encrypted message containing an address in Albuquerque and a confirmation code. She memorized both and deleted the message, then began the mechanical process of packing. Clothes, toiletries, documents, laptop. Everything fit into a single duffel bag exactly as she had designed it to. Light and mobile, ready to move on 30 minutes' notice. The knock on her door came just as she was zipping the bag closed. She froze, calculating probabilities. It could be Specialist Park checking on her after the meeting. It could be another soldier looking to congratulate her on a shot. Or it could be Agent Vance with a team ready to detain her for questioning that would not end until they had extracted every truth she had spent 18 months burying. Who is it she called out? It is Major Reeves, the voice replied. I need to speak with you, Corporal. Vera shoved the duffel under her bunk and moved to open the door. Major Reeves stood in the hallway looking uncomfortable, his uniform crisp despite the afternoon heat, his expression suggesting this was not a conversation he wanted to be having. Major, Vera said. How can I help you, sir? May I come in? Reeves asked. This is not a conversation for the hallway. She stepped back and let him enter. He glanced around the room, noting its minimal furnishings and lack of personal touches, his eyes lingering on the empty walls where most soldiers would have photographs or posters. Reeves turned back to her with an expression that mixed curiosity with concern. Corporal, I'm going to be direct with you, he said. General Harwick asked me to deliver a message. He believes you are in some kind of trouble, and he believes that your shot this morning has made that trouble significantly worse. He wanted me to tell you that if you need help, if there are circumstances that explain your situation, he is willing to listen, officially and with proper protections in place. Vera kept her face neutral. I appreciate the General's concern, sir, but I am not in any trouble. I simply made a good shot. Reeves shook his head. I was there when Agent Vance showed you that photograph. He said, I saw your face when you looked at it. You recognized something in that image, even if you denied it. He moved closer, lowering his voice. Whatever you are running from, whatever you are hiding, is going to catch up with you. Agent Vance does not give up. He will dig and dig until he finds the truth. Maybe it would be better to control that truth yourself rather than letting him discover it. Sir, there is nothing to control, Vera said. I am what my file says I am. The major studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, Corporal, he said. I delivered the message. What you do with it is your decision. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it is worth, that shot this morning was the most impressive display of marksmanship I have ever seen. Whoever trained you did exceptional work. Thank you, sir. He left, pulling the door closed behind him. Vera waited until his footsteps faded down the hallway before pulling the duffel from under her bunk. She had perhaps 6 hours until full dark, maybe 8 before someone noticed she was missing. The drive to Albuquerque would take about 9 hours if she pushed the speed limit and stopped only for gas. Tight timing, but manageable if she left soon. She changed into civilian clothes, jeans, and a plain shirt that would not draw attention. The uniform went into the barracks laundry bag where it would be found tomorrow when people started asking questions about her absence. Her military ID and dog tags she kept, insurance against complications if she got pulled over during the drive. Everything else she could live without. The base was changing shifts when she walked to the parking lot where her vehicle waited. Soldiers moved between buildings, focused on their own concerns, paying her no attention. She threw the duffel into the back seat and started the engine, a reliable sedan she had purchased used and maintained carefully for exactly this kind of necessity. The guard at the main gate checked her ID without interest and waved her through. Fort Bridger disappeared in her rearview mirror as she merged onto the highway heading south. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her of distant fires she had watched burn in places most people would never visit. She pushed the accelerator down and felt the car respond, carrying her away from questions she could not answer and toward a future that was once again uncertain and dangerous. 4,000 meters. One perfect shot. The distance that had defined her for years had finally destroyed the careful invisibility she had built. She should have missed. She should have stayed seated. She should have remembered that excellence came with consequences that could not always be controlled or contained. The highway stretched empty ahead of her as night settled across the desert landscape. Vera kept her speed exactly at the limit, not fast enough to draw attention, but fast enough to put distance between herself and Fort Bridger. The radio played country music she did not really hear, background noise to fill the silence that pressed against the windows. Her phone rang just after she crossed into New Mexico. She glanced at the screen and saw a number she did not recognize, which meant either her handlers calling from a different line or something worse. She answered using the car's Bluetooth system, keeping both hands on the wheel. Corporal Castellanos, a voice said, "This is Agent Vance. I think we should talk." Vera's grip tightened on the steering wheel, but her voice remained steady. "Agent Vance," she said, "I already answered your questions this afternoon." "No, you did not answer my questions," Vance replied. "You gave me a story that fell apart under the lightest scrutiny. But that is not why I am calling. I am calling because about 40 minutes ago, your handlers activated emergency extraction protocols. We monitor those protocols, Corporal. We have been monitoring them since we first flagged you as a person of interest." The cold in her chest spread outward. If they were monitoring the extraction protocols, they knew she had left the base. They probably knew which direction she was heading. They might already have resources positioning to intercept her somewhere along this lonely stretch of highway. "I do not know what you are talking about," Vera said. "You are driving south on Highway 25, Vance said. "You left Fort Bridger approximately 90 minutes ago. You are heading toward Albuquerque, where a safe house has been prepared for you." He paused. "Here is what I need you to understand, Corporal. The people who arranged your current situation, the people who made you disappear after Syria, they do not have your best interests in mind. They are protecting their own operational security. You're a loose end that became visible, and loose ends get tied off permanently." "You are lying," Varys said, "trying to turn me against people who protected me." "Am I?" Vance asked. "Then explain why 3 members of your original team died during that Syria extraction. Explain why you are the only survivor of an operation that was supposed to be routine. Explain why you were given a new identity instead of being properly debriefed and reassigned." Varys said nothing. The questions cut too close to doubts she had buried, but never fully eliminated. The Syria operation had gone wrong in ways that felt orchestrated rather than accidental. The ambush had been too well positioned, too perfectly timed, and the extraction afterward had prioritized getting her out while leaving others behind in ways that suggested someone had made calculations about acceptable losses. "The people you work for specialize in compartmentalization," Vance continued. "They put operators in positions where they become deniable, where their existence can be erased if necessary. You made yourself undeniable this morning with that shot. Now, they need to make you disappear again, but this time they cannot risk you resurfacing. That safe house in Albuquerque is not a safe house, Corporal. It is a termination point." His words hung in the air between the radio speaker and the empty road ahead. Vera's tactical mind ran through the scenario, examining it from angles that made her stomach tighten. If Vance was right, if the safe house was a trap, she was driving directly into it with no backup and no alternative plan. But if he was wrong, if this was psychological warfare designed to isolate her from her support network, then believing him meant abandoning the only protection she had. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. "You have been hunting me since this morning. You want me detained and interrogated. Everything you're saying could be designed to manipulate me into making mistakes." "Fair question," Vance said. "Here's my answer. If I wanted you detained, I would have had a team waiting at the Fort Bridger gate when you left. If I wanted you dead, I would have arranged an accident on that lonely highway you were driving. What I want, Corporal, is the truth about what happened in Syria. I want to know who authorized that operation and who made the decision to sacrifice 3 operators to protect 1. I think you want those answers too." Vera checked her mirrors. Empty road behind, empty road ahead, darkness pressing in from both sides. She was exposed out here, vulnerable in ways she had not fully appreciated when she made the decision to run. Vance was right about one thing. If anyone wanted her eliminated, this was the perfect opportunity. "What are you proposing?" she asked carefully. "Pull off at the next exit," Vance said. "There's a rest stop about 12 miles ahead. I will meet you there with a full protection detail. We bring you in officially, with proper legal representation and immunity agreements in writing. You tell us everything about Syria and about the network that has been hiding you. In exchange, we protect you from whoever might want to ensure your silence permanently. And if I refuse, then you keep driving to Albuquerque," Vance said. "You walk into whatever is waiting for you there. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe it really is a safe house and you live to disappear again. But if I am right, Corporal, you have about 2 hours left to live. The highway sign appeared in her headlights. Rest stop 12 miles. Her hands were steady on the wheel, but her mind was racing through calculations and probabilities. Trust Vance and potentially walk into federal custody, where she would be pressured to reveal information that could destroy careers and end lives. Trust her handlers and potentially walk into a termination scenario designed to eliminate a loose end that had become too visible. Or choose a third option: abandon both paths, find her own way, disappear on her own terms without relying on anyone who had their own agenda that might conflict with her survival. It would be harder, riskier, but it would be entirely under her control. She had skills and training and resources they did not know about. She could vanish into the vast, anonymous spaces of America and stay vanished if she was careful and disciplined. The rest stop exit appeared ahead, a dark turnoff marked by a single blue sign reflecting her headlights. Vera's foot hovered over the brake pedal. Vance would be waiting there with agents and equipment and promises backed by federal authority. Or maybe he would be waiting there with nothing but a detention team ready to take her into custody regardless of what promises he had made over the phone. She passed the exit without slowing. In the rearview mirror, she watched it disappear behind her, a choice made and committed to. Her phone rang again immediately. She declined the call and kept driving. 2 more calls came in the next 5 minutes, both from Vance's number. She ignored them both. The smart thing to do was ditch the phone entirely. It was a tracking device that broadcast her location to anyone with the right access. She pulled into a gas station just outside a small town whose name she did not bother learning. While the tank filled, she wiped the phone clean of anything useful, then dropped it in a trash can beside the pumps. Someone would find it eventually, probably law enforcement, responding to a ping that would lead them to a dead end. She paid cash for the gas and bought a cheap prepaid phone from the station's convenience store. The clerk barely looked at her, focused on his own phone and whatever distraction it provided from the monotony of night shift work. Vera left without making an impression, just another traveler passing through in the dark. Back on the highway, she bypassed Albuquerque entirely, taking an exit that led east instead of continuing south. Her handlers would expect her at the safe house within the next few hours. When she did not arrive, they would begin contingency protocols, reaching out through channels she was supposed to monitor. But without her phone, without any way to contact her, they would be operating blind. Agent Vance would realize she had ignored his offer and would escalate his investigation. General Harwick would discover her absence and would draw his own conclusions. The careful house of cards she had built around her identity would collapse completely, leaving nothing but questions and warrants and people looking for someone who no longer existed. The road stretched ahead into darkness that felt both threatening and liberating. She had no destination, no plan beyond putting distance between herself and everyone who thought they knew what she should do next. For 18 months, she had been controlled by agreements and handlers and the weight of past mistakes. Now she was free of all of it, accountable to no one, constrained by nothing except her own survival instincts. For 1,000 meters, the shot that had destroyed her cover had also severed the chains that bound her to other people's agendas. She was alone again, operating without backup or support, making decisions that would determine whether she survived or became another casualty of operations that officially never happened. It was terrifying and familiar in equal measure, a return to the kind of existence she had known before Fort Bridger, before the pretense of normalcy and administrative duties. She pushed the accelerator down and felt the car respond. Somewhere behind her, people were mobilizing resources and initiating searches. Somewhere ahead, the future waited undefined and dangerous. But for now, in this moment, she was between both forces, moving through the space where neither could touch her. It would not last. It never did. But she would use every second of freedom while it remained available. She drove through the night with the windows down, cold air rushing through the car to keep her alert. Towns passed in sequence, small clusters of light against the darkness, places with populations measured in hundreds rather than thousands. She stopped only for gas and caffeine, paying cash and avoiding security cameras when possible. By dawn, she had crossed 3 state lines and covered enough distance that immediate pursuit became logistically complicated. The motel she chose was the kind that asked no questions as long as payment came in advance. Single story, aging paint, a parking lot half filled with vehicles that had seen better years. The clerk was an older woman who took Vera's cash without asking for identification and handed over a key attached to a plastic tag, with a room number worn almost illegible from use. The room smelled of old cigarettes and industrial cleaning products. Vera locked the door and checked the window, noting the parking lot view and the empty field beyond that offered multiple exit routes if necessary. She set her duffel on the bed and allowed herself to acknowledge the exhaustion that had been building since the moment she squeezed the trigger at Fort Bridger. 24 hours. That was all the time that had passed since the shot that destroyed her carefully maintained invisibility. One day, since she had been a forgettable records clerk filing paperwork in an air-conditioned office. Now, she was a fugitive running from multiple agencies and her own former handlers, trying to stay ahead of people with resources and authority that far exceeded her individual capabilities. She needed to think strategically, to plan beyond the immediate instinct to keep moving. Running without destination was just slow-motion suicide. Eventually exhaustion or bad luck or simple mathematics would catch up with her. She needed advantages, leverage, something that would change the equation from hunter and prey into something more balanced. The Syria operation. That was the key that everyone seemed focused on. Agent Vance wanted information about it. Her handlers wanted to ensure she never provided that information. General Harwick had recognized something in her that connected to it. The operation itself had been classified at levels that erased normal documentation, but that did not mean evidence did not exist. Someone had authorized it. Someone had planned it. Someone had made the decision to sacrifice 3 operators and let one survive. If she could find that documentation, if she could prove what really happened in Syria, she would have insurance. Evidence that could protect her by threatening people who value their own careers and freedom more than they valued eliminating one inconvenient operator. It was leverage, the kind that could transform her from a target into someone too dangerous to touch. But getting that documentation would require accessing systems she no longer had clearance to enter. She would need help from someone with the right access and the right motivation. Someone who had reasons to want the truth exposed, who would benefit from the revelation of whatever conspiracy had turned a routine extraction into a massacre. The problem was trust. Everyone who knew about Syria had agendas that conflicted with hers. Agent Vance wanted prosecutions and careers built on exposing corruption. Her handlers wanted silence and continued operational security. General Harwick wanted explanations that made sense of what he had witnessed. None of them cared about her survival, except as it served their larger purposes. She thought about the photograph Vance had shown her. Surveillance footage from Syria, grainy and distant, but detailed enough to potentially identify her. If he had that photograph, he had access to other materials from the operation. Mission logs, intelligence assessments, communications intercepts. Not the full picture, but pieces that could be assembled into something useful if she knew what questions to ask. Vera pulled out the prepaid phone she had purchased and stared at it for a long moment. Calling Vance was a risk. Any contact established a thread he could pull, a way to track her movements and narrow her location. But he was also the only person she knew who had both access to Syria documentation and a vested interest in exposing whatever happened there. She dialed his number from memory. He answered on the first ring. "Corporal Castellanos," he said. "I was beginning to think you had decided to disappear permanently." "I am considering my options," Vera replied. "You said you wanted the truth about Syria. I am prepared to discuss that, but I need certain assurances first." "You ignore my offer at the rest stop," Vance said. "That was a one-time opportunity for protective custody and immunity. The situation has changed since then. You are now officially AWOL. General Harwick has reported your disappearance. Your handlers have flagged you as a security risk. Every law enforcement agency in the Southwest is looking for you. Then you have leverage, Varys said. But so do I. I know things about Syria that go beyond what you can piece together from surveillance footage. I know who authorized the operation and why it was designed to fail. I know which operators were expendable and who made that determination. That information has value. Vance was quiet for a moment. What do you want? He asked finally. I want immunity in writing, Varys said. Federal witness protection with guarantees that extend beyond your agency. I want assurance that the people who ran Syria cannot touch me once I testify. And I want access to the full operational files before I agree to anything. That is a substantial list of demands from someone who is currently a fugitive. Those are non-negotiable terms from someone who has information that could destroy careers at the highest levels. Vera kept her voice level, factual. You want Syria exposed. I want to survive. Our interests align as long as you can provide what I need. Where are you? Vance asked. Somewhere you will not find me unless I choose to be found. She could hear him thinking, calculating probabilities and options. You have 48 hours to arrange the immunity agreements and access to the files. When you have them, place an advertisement in the Albuquerque Journal Classifieds. Use the phrase Ghost 7. I will contact you with a meeting location. Ghost 7, Vance repeated. That was your call sign in Syria. Yes. Why do they call you that? Because I made shots nobody believed were possible, Varys said. And because when the operation fell apart, I was the only ghost that made it home. She ended the call before he could respond and immediately pulled the battery from the phone. The conversation had lasted less than 2 minutes. Not enough time for a full trace, but enough to give Vance a general area if he had resources positioned correctly. She needed to move again, put more distance between herself and this location. But first she allowed herself an hour of sleep, setting an alarm on her wristwatch and lying on top of the motel bed, fully clothed with her boots still on. Sleep came quickly despite the circumstances, a trained ability to rest when opportunity presented itself regardless of environmental conditions. Dreams came with it, fragments of Syria and gunfire and faces of teammates who had not made it to the extraction point. The alarm woke her into gray morning light filtering through thin curtains. She splashed water on her face, checked the parking lot for any vehicles that seemed out of place, and loaded her duffel back into the car. The motel clerk was not at the desk when she left the key, just a sign asking guests to drop them in a box marked for that purpose. Back on the road, she continued east, avoiding interstate highways in favor of smaller routes that offered more flexibility and fewer surveillance cameras. The landscape changed gradually from desert to high plains, empty spaces broken by occasional towns that looked like they were losing their battles against economic decline and population exodus. She stopped at a library in a town called Redford, population barely 3,000 according to the sign at the city limits. The library was small, but had public computers with internet access. Vera used a fake email to create accounts she would abandon after one use, then began searching for information about Syria operations from 3 years ago. Most of what she found was sanitized or redacted, official reports that confirmed operations occurred without providing meaningful details. But buried in congressional testimony and inspector general reports were hints of questions asked about asset expenditure and unauthorized mission parameters. Someone had been asking the right questions, even if they had not gotten satisfactory answers. One name appeared multiple times in the documentation. Senator Patricia Whitmore, Armed Services Committee, known for aggressive oversight of special operations programs. She had been pushing for investigations into operations with unusual casualty rates and demanding accountability for missions that seemed to lack proper authorization. Vera memorized the senator's office contact information and deleted her search history. Senator Whitmore represented another potential ally, someone with authority and motivation to expose whatever had happened in Syria. But senators came with their own complications, political calculations that might sacrifice individual operators to serve larger agendas. She left the library and found a diner that served breakfast all day. The coffee was strong and the eggs were unremarkable, and nobody paid her any attention beyond taking her order. She sat in a booth by the window and watched the street, noting vehicles and pedestrians, looking for patterns that might indicate surveillance. Her reflection in the window glass showed someone who looked tired but not defeated. 18 months of filing paperwork had softened some edges, but the fundamentals remained. She was still the operator who had survived Syria when others had not. Still the shooter who could make impossible shots at impossible distances. That had not changed. The circumstances had changed, the people hunting her had changed, but her core capabilities remained intact. For 1,000 meters, the distance that had started this cascade was also the skill that might end it. If she could leverage her abilities correctly, if she could position herself as valuable rather than expendable, she might survive this. But it would require precision of a different kind than marksmanship. Strategic precision, tactical manipulation of people and situations. The kind of complex operational planning that turned disadvantages into advantages and transformed prey into predator. 2 days passed in careful movement and strategic positioning. Vera stayed mobile, never sleeping in the same place twice, always maintaining awareness of her surroundings and potential threats. She monitored news reports for any mention of her disappearance, but found nothing. The military preferred to handle these situations quietly, without public acknowledgement that might raise uncomfortable questions. On the morning of the 3rd day, she purchased a copy of the Albuquerque Journal from a gas station outside Santa Fe. She found the classifieds in the back section and scanned through listings for used furniture and employment opportunities until she found what she was looking for. A small advertisement in the personal section. Ghost 7. Terms accepted. Arrangements proceeding. Meet at original rest stop, 72 hours from publication. Agent Vance had moved faster than she expected. Either he had authority to arrange immunity agreements without extensive approval processes, or someone higher up wanted Syria exposed badly enough to expedite the paperwork. Both possibilities carried implications she would need to consider carefully. 72 hours gave her time to prepare, to establish contingencies in case the meeting turned into a trap despite Vance's assurances. She spent the day acquiring materials she would need. A second prepaid phone purchase from a different store in a different town. A detailed map of the rest stop area, studied until she knew every approach and exit route. Binoculars purchased from a sporting goods store to allow distant observation before committing to direct contact. She also made another call, this time to Senator Whitmore's office in Washington. The staff member who answered was professionally courteous but clearly accustomed to screening calls. Vera asked to speak with the senator directly regarding Syria operations and unusual casualty rates in classified missions. The staff member informed her that the senator received many calls about sensitive topics and suggested submitting information in writing through official channels. Tell the senator that Ghost 7 survived the ambush 3 years ago, Vera said. Tell her I have direct testimony about operational failures and command decisions that resulted in 3 Kia. Tell her I am willing to testify, but only under specific conditions. The senator has 72 hours to respond before I make other arrangements. She left the number for her second prepaid phone and ended the call. Either Whitmore would recognize the significance or she would not. Either way, Vera had established another potential avenue, another piece of leverage that might prove useful if Vance's offer turned out to be less reliable than advertised. The hours until the meeting crawled past with agonizing slowness. Vera used the time to rehearse scenarios, to plan responses to various complications, to prepare herself mentally for confrontation that could go multiple directions. She cleaned and checked the pistol she had kept hidden in her vehicle, a weapon that did not officially exist in any registry or armory. Insurance against worst-case scenarios. The night before the meeting, she drove to within 5 miles of the rest stop and found a position on high ground that offered clear sight lines to the location. She spent the pre-dawn hours watching through binoculars as the first light revealed the terrain and buildings. The rest stop looked exactly as it had when she passed it days earlier. Single building with restrooms and vending machines, parking area that could accommodate perhaps 30 vehicles, picnic tables scattered under metal awnings. As morning progressed, she watched vehicles come and go, families on road trips, and long-haul truckers taking breaks from interstate driving. Nothing that looked like surveillance or staging for an operation. But professional teams would be invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. The absence of obvious threat did not guarantee safety. At the designated meeting time, 10:00 hours, 3 black SUVs pulled into the rest stop and parked in formation that suggested tactical training. Men emerged wearing suits and expressions that marked them as federal agents. Vera counted 8 total, more than would be necessary for a simple meeting, but fewer than would be deployed for a hostile apprehension. Agent Vance was among them, recognizable even at distance by his posture and the way others deferred to his positioning. She waited another 30 minutes, watching for secondary teams or surveillance elements that might be positioned to track her approach. Nothing revealed itself. Either Vance was operating in good faith, or he was using tactics sophisticated enough that she could not detect them from her current position. Her second prepaid phone buzzed with an incoming text message. The number was one she did not recognize, but the message content identified the sender. "This is Senator Whitmore. I received your message. Ghost 7 operations are of significant interest to ongoing investigations. I can provide senatorial protection and subpoena power for testimony. Need to verify your identity and circumstances. Call this number within 1 hour." Vera stared at the message for several seconds. 2 offers on the table now, 2 potential paths forward. Agent Vance with federal immunity and witness protection. Senator Whitmore with congressional authority and political cover. Both came with risks. Both required trust in systems and people who might prioritize their own agendas over her survival. She made her decision based on simple tactical calculation. Vance was here now, in position, with agreements already arranged according to his advertisement. Whitmore was in Washington, operating through intermediaries, offering protection that would take time to formalize. Time was a luxury she could not afford. Every additional hour on the run increased probability of capture by her handlers or other hostile elements. Vera descended from her observation position and approached the rest stop from an angle that kept her visible to Vance's team, but allowed rapid retreat if necessary. She walked slowly, hands visible and empty, posture non-threatening but alert. The agents noticed her approach immediately, positions shifting in response, hands moving toward weapons that remained holstered. Agent Vance stepped forward as she entered the parking area. "Corporal Castellanos," he called out. "Thank you for coming. I was beginning to think you might have decided against this meeting. I needed to be certain you were serious about the agreements," Vera replied. She stopped about 20 feet from a nearest agent, maintaining distance that would give her reaction time if the situation deteriorated. Vance reached into his jacket slowly and produced a folder. "Everything is here," he said. "Federal immunity covering any actions related to Syria operations. Witness protection with full documentation and relocation. Legal representation provided by the Justice Department. All contingent on your complete cooperation and testimony regarding the operation." He walked forward alone and extended the folder toward her. Vera took it and opened it, scanning through legal language and official seals that appeared legitimate. But appearances could be manufactured. She had learned that lesson in Syria when an operation that appeared routine transformed into an ambush that killed her teammates. "How do I know this is real?" she asked. "How do I know I will not provide testimony and then disappear into a cell somewhere while you disavow any agreements?" "You have my word," Vance said. His expression was serious, no trace of deception she could detect. "But I understand that means little given the circumstances, so I brought additional assurance." He gestured toward one of the SUVs. The rear door opened and a woman emerged, older, with gray hair and sharp eyes that assessed Vera with professional intensity. She wore a business suit and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. She walked forward and stopped beside Agent Vance. "Corporal Castellanos," the woman said. "I am Deputy Director Ellen Rackford from the Defense Intelligence Agency. I authorized Agent Vance's immunity offer personally. Your testimony about Syria has potential to expose significant operational failures and command negligence. We need your cooperation, and we are prepared to guarantee your safety in exchange for it." Vera studied her face, looking for tells that might indicate deception. Rackford met her gaze without flinching, no nervousness or evasion visible. Either she was telling the truth, or she was exceptionally skilled at lying. In Vera's experience, people at deputy director level tended toward the former. They had enough authority that deception was rarely necessary. "I want one addition to the agreement," Vera said. "Senator Whitmore gets access to my testimony. Whatever I tell you, she gets to hear it too. Congressional oversight ensures this does not get buried quietly." Vance glanced at Rackford, who nodded slowly. "That is acceptable," Rackford said. "Senator Whitmore has been persistent in her inquiries about Syria. Having her involved might actually expedite the investigation." "Then we have an agreement," Vera said. She closed the folder and looked at the assembled agents, at the vehicle's position for extraction, at the highway stretching away in both directions. This is the point of no return, she realized. Once she committed to this path, once she provided testimony, there would be no going back to invisibility and quiet obscurity. But there was no going back anyway. That option had died the moment she fired a shot at 4,000 meters and reminded everyone who was watching that Ghost 7 still existed, still possessed skills that made her valuable and dangerous in equal measure. The only question now was whether she could leverage that value into survival or whether it would ultimately destroy her the way it had destroyed her teammates in Syria. "One more thing," Vera said. "Before we go anywhere, before I testify to anything, I need to know, the ambush in Syria, was it deliberate? Did someone set us up to fail?" Agent Vance and Deputy Director Rackford exchanged glances. "That is one of the questions we need you to help us answer," Rackford said. "We have suspicions, but not proof. Your testimony could provide the evidence necessary to pursue those suspicions to their conclusion." "Which means you do not know for certain," Vera said. "You're asking me to trust you with my life based on an investigation that might or might not prove what actually happened." "Yes," Rackford said simply. "That is exactly what we are asking. It is a risk, but staying on the run is also a risk. And based on what we know about your former handlers, it is a risk with significantly worse odds of survival." Vera looked at the folder in her hands, at the official seals and legal language that promised protection that might or might not be honored. She thought about her teammates who died in Syria, about the 18 months she spent filing paperwork and pretending to be someone she was not, about the shot that destroyed her cover and forced her to confront truths she had been avoiding since the ambush. "All right," Vera said finally. "I will provide testimony, but I want on record immediately, before anyone has time to change their minds or revise agreements. And I want Senator Whitmore present for at least part of it." Deputy Director Rackford nodded. "We can arrange video testimony within the hour," she said. "Senator Whitmore's office has already been contacted. She is flying in from Washington and will arrive this evening. We can do preliminary testimony now and full deposition when she arrives." Vera signed the immunity agreement using a pen that Vance provided. Her signature looked strange on the official document, a name she had been using for 18 months but which still felt like it belonged to someone else. The agents relaxed slightly once the paperwork was complete, their postures shifting from tactical readiness to professional escort mode. They drove in convoy to a federal building in Albuquerque, the SUVs maintaining formation through light traffic. Vera sat in the back seat of the lead vehicle between two agents who remained silent and watchful. Through the window, she observed the city passing by. Ordinary people conducting ordinary lives without awareness of the currents of conspiracy and violence that flowed beneath the surface of normal existence. The federal building was anonymous concrete and glass, the kind of architecture designed to project authority without character. They entered through a secure garage and took an elevator to the 7th floor, where a conference room had been prepared with recording equipment and legal observers. Vera was offered water and coffee, both of which she declined. She wanted her mind clear and focused for what was coming. Agent Vance sat across from her with a digital recorder and a notepad. Deputy Director Rackford positioned herself to the side, observing without direct participation. Two attorneys from the Justice Department sat at the far end of the table, present to ensure everything proceeded according to legal protocols. "Let's start with the basics," Vance said. "Your real name, rank, and the unit you were serving with in Syria 3 years ago." Vera took a breath and began dismantling the cover story she had maintained for 18 months. "My name is Vera Castellanos. That part is real. My rank at the time was Staff Sergeant. I was attached to a joint task force operating under the designation Anvil 7. We specialized in long-range reconnaissance and target elimination in denied territory." "What was your role within Anvil 7? "Primary marksman. My call sign was Ghost 7. I held the distance record for confirmed elimination at 4,200 meters. Vance made notes without looking up. "Tell me about the operation that resulted in 3 Kia and your subsequent disappearance." Vera felt the memories surface, sharp and painful despite the time that had passed. "We were tasked with extracting a high-value intelligence asset from a compound outside Aleppo. The asset had information about arms trafficking networks operating across multiple borders. Standard extraction protocol: in and out within 2 hours, minimal engagement authorized. But it did not go according to protocol. No, we inserted at 300 hours and reached the compound without incident. The asset was where intelligence said he would be, ready for extraction. But when we moved to exfil, we encountered a coordinated ambush. Not random hostile forces. These were organized, professional, with equipment and tactics that suggested advanced warning of our operation." Vera's hands tightened on the table edge. "They hit us from 3 sides simultaneously. RPGs, automatic weapons, coordinated fields of fire. It was designed to kill, not capture. We fought our way toward the extraction point, but lost Sergeant Marcus Odom in the first 2 minutes. Corporal Jennifer Kwan took shrapnel and bled out before we could get her stabilized. Staff Sergeant Terrence Washington held a choke point so the rest of us could pull back. He did not make it out. How did you survive when the others did not?" Deputy Director Rackford leaned forward slightly, her attention sharpening. Vera met her gaze and saw recognition there, understanding of what she was about to say. "Because I was ordered to prioritize my own extraction," Vera said. "Over the radio, I received direct orders from Mission Control to abandon the team and make for an alternate extraction point 2 clicks north. I was told helicopter assets were repositioning and would only be available at that location for a 4-minute window. I argued. I said we could all make it if we coordinated movement. But the order was explicit. Ghost 7 extracts immediately. All other personnel are expendable." "Who gave that order?" Vance asked quietly. "I do not know the voice," Vera said. "It was not our usual handler. Someone higher up the chain, using encryption protocols I had not encountered before. But whoever it was had authority because the helicopter was exactly where they said it would be, exactly when they said it would be there. And you left your team." The words carried no judgment, but Vera felt their weight anyway. "Yes," she said. "I followed orders and extracted while my teammates died, covering a retreat I was not part of. I have lived with that decision every day since." The room fell silent, except for the quiet hum of recording equipment. Vance glanced at Rackford, who gave a small nod. He returned his attention to Vera with an expression that mixed sympathy with determination. "Did you suspect at the time that the operation was compromised?" he asked. "Not immediately. But during the debrief, things did not add up. The intelligence about the asset's location was too perfect. The timing of the ambush was too precise. And the extraction order that prioritized me specifically over the rest of the team made no tactical sense unless someone had decided in advance which personnel were acceptable losses." "What happened during the debrief?" "I was isolated for 3 days," Vera said. "Intensive questioning about everything I witnessed, every detail of the operation. But they were not asking questions designed to understand what went wrong. They were asking questions designed to establish that I could not identify who gave the extraction order or prove that the ambush was anything other than bad luck. And then they offered you the agreement." Yes. A lieutenant colonel named Brennan presented me with options. Face investigation into whether I abandoned my team inappropriately, potentially resulting in court-martial and prison time, or accept reassignment to administrative duties under a clean record, with the understanding that I would never discuss the Syria operation or attempt to investigate what actually happened. So they silenced you by threatening you. Rackford spoke for the first time since the testimony began. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Brennan, she said, currently stationed at Fort Bragg, handling operational security for classified missions. We have been investigating him for 6 months based on irregularities in mission reporting and asset management. Your testimony provides direct evidence of his involvement in operational cover-ups. Vera looked at her with surprise. You already suspected him. We suspected several officers in the chain of command, Rackford said, but we had no witnesses willing to testify. Everyone involved in Syria operations has been either reassigned, discharged, or convinced that speaking up would end their careers. You're the first person with direct knowledge who has been willing to go on record. Because I did not have a choice anymore, Vera said. I made a shot that destroyed my cover. If I had stayed quiet, I would be dead by now. Agent Vance closed his notepad. What you have provided today is enough to initiate formal investigation into the Syria operation and Lieutenant Colonel Brennan's role in it. When Senator Whitmore arrives this evening, we will need you to provide additional details about operational protocols and command structure. But the foundation is established. What happens now? Vera asked. Now we protect you while the investigation proceeds, Rackford said. Witness protection will relocate you under a new identity. You will have regular contact with our office and with Senator Whitmore's oversight committee. When arrests are made, you will be required to testify in military court. But until then, you disappear again, this time under protection that we control rather than protection designed to keep you silent. The door to the conference room opened and an aide entered, speaking quietly to Rackford. The deputy director nodded and turned back to Vera. Senator Whitmore has arrived early, she said. She is very interested in hearing your testimony directly. Are you prepared to continue? Vera felt the exhaustion pressing down on her, the accumulated weight of 3 days on the run and 18 months of enforced silence before that. But she also felt something else. Relief. The truth was finally being spoken, documented, made official. The teammates who died in Syria would get justice, or at least the possibility of it. Yes, she said. I am ready. Senator Whitmore entered the conference room with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to command. She was younger than Vera expected, perhaps early 50s, with sharp eyes that assessed everything they touched. She sat across from Vera and placed a folder on the table between them. Corporal Castellanos, the senator said, I have been investigating Syria operations for 2 years. Your testimony is the break I have been waiting for. She opened the folder and pulled out a document. This is a summary of irregularities I have identified. Operational budgets that do not match reported activities. Asset payments that cannot be traced. Mission reports with significant redactions that seem designed to hide failures rather than protect sources. She looked up. I believe Syria was not an isolated incident. I believe there is a pattern of commanders authorizing high-risk operations with built-in deniability, sacrificing operators to protect their own careers when things go wrong. Vera leaned forward. How many operations? At least 7 that I can document, Whitmore said. Possibly more, all with similar patterns. Ambushes that seem too well coordinated. Extraction failures that result in Kia. Survivors who are silenced through threats or reassignment. And, at the center of it, a small group of officers who have been promoted despite these operational failures rather than held accountable for them. She slid the document across to Vera. I need you to help me connect the dots. Your testimony about Syria gives me leverage to subpoena records and compel testimony from others. Together, we can expose the entire network and ensure this never happens to another operator. 6 months later, Vera sat in a military courtroom watching Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Brennan face the consequences of decisions he had made in the shadows of classified operations. The proceedings had taken months to assemble, months of testimony and evidence and legal maneuvering. But now the truth was finally being spoken in public, recorded for history, impossible to bury or deny. Senator Whitmore had been relentless in her investigation. She had used Vera's testimony as leverage to crack open sealed records and compel testimony from others who had remained silent out of fear or misguided loyalty. The pattern she uncovered was worse than anyone had suspected. Not 7 operations, but 12, spanning 4 years, all sharing the same characteristics. Commanders authorizing high-risk missions with built-in deniability, then sacrificing operators when things went wrong to protect their own advancement. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan had been at the center of it, along with 2 other senior officers who now faced courts-martial of their own. They had treated operators as expendable assets, calculating acceptable losses the way accountants calculated depreciation. When missions failed, they buried the failures under classification and threatened survivors into silence. The Syria operation had been just one example among many. General Harwick had attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery with an expression that mixed anger with profound disappointment. After the prosecution rested their case, he had approached Vera in the hallway outside the courtroom. His weathered face showed the weight of what he had learned. "I should have pushed harder when you made that shot," he said. "I knew something was wrong. I knew you were more than what your file indicated. If I had pursued it then, maybe we could have exposed this sooner." "You could not have known, sir," Vera replied. "The system was designed to hide the truth. Even when people asked questions, they were redirected or silenced." Harwick shook his head. "That shot at 4,000 meters," he said. "It was exceptional. But more than that, it was honest. You were not hiding anymore. You were showing everyone who you really were, regardless of the consequences. That took courage I did not fully appreciate at the time." "It almost got me killed," Vera said. "But it did not," Harwick replied. "Instead, it exposed the corruption that has been destroying good operators for years. Sometimes doing the right thing looks like a mistake until enough time passes to see the full impact." The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Brennan would spend the next 20 years in military prison, his career and reputation destroyed. The other officers received similar sentences. More importantly, the investigation had triggered policy changes throughout Special Operations Command. New oversight protocols, mandatory third-party reviews of high-casualty missions, protection for whistleblowers who reported operational irregularities. It would not bring back the operators who had died. It would not erase the trauma carried by survivors who had been silenced and threatened. But it meant future operators would have protections that Vera's team had lacked. It meant the casual sacrifice of personnel for career advancement would face consequences rather than being buried under classification. After the sentencing, Agent Vance found Vera outside the courthouse. He looked tired but satisfied, the expression of someone who had invested months of work into achieving a specific outcome and had finally succeeded. "You did well in there," he said. "Your testimony was clear and unshakable. The defense never laid a glove on you." "I just told the truth," Vera said. After 18 months of lying, it was almost refreshing. "What are your plans now?" Vance asked. "Witness protection is still available if you want it. New identity, new location, all expenses covered." Vera considered the offer. Part of her wanted to disappear again, to find some quiet place where nobody knew her history or capabilities. But she had learned something important over the past 6 months. Hiding had not protected her. Silence had not kept her safe. The only thing that had ultimately saved her life was speaking the truth loudly enough that it could not be ignored. "I think I am done hiding," she said. "Senator Whitmore has offered me a position with her oversight staff, helping investigate other operational irregularities, working with operators who want to report problems but do not know how. It seems like useful work." Vance smiled slightly. "That sounds exactly like something you would choose," he said, "using your experience to help others avoid what you went through." He extended his hand. "It has been an honor working with you, Corporal. Or should I say Staff Sergeant, since your actual rank has been restored." She shook his hand. "Just Vera is fine," she said. "I have had enough of hiding behind titles and call signs." "Fair enough." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it is worth, that shot at Fort Bridger. For 1,000 meters on the first try. I have worked with a lot of elite operators over the years, and I have never seen anything quite like it. You should be proud of what you can do. I am learning to be, Vera said. For a long time, I thought my skills were a curse, something that made me dangerous to everyone around me. But maybe they're just tools. What matters is how they get used and who they serve. Vance nodded and walked away. Vera stood for a moment in the late afternoon sunlight, feeling the weight of the past 6 months settling into something that resembled peace. The future remained uncertain in many ways. She would have new responsibilities, new challenges, new people depending on her judgment and experience. But for the first time since Syria, she felt like she was moving forward rather than running away. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Specialist Park, the colleague from the records office at Fort Bridger. He had reached out several times during the trial, offering support and asking if she needed anything. The message was brief. Saw the verdict on the news. Justice served. Proud to have served with you even if it was just filing paperwork for a few months. Vera smiled and typed a response. The paperwork was the easy part. Thanks for everything. She walked to her car, a different vehicle than the one she had used to flee Fort Bridger 6 months earlier. That car was in an evidence locker somewhere, part of the investigation into her unauthorized departure. This car was newer, more reliable, purchased with money from her restored back pay and rank. It represented legitimate existence rather than desperate fugitive movement. As she drove through the city, she thought about the moment on the firing range that had changed everything. General Harwick's challenge. 13 failed attempts. Her decision to step forward despite knowing the risks. The perfect shot that had destroyed her cover and ultimately exposed a conspiracy that had cost so many lives. For 1,000 meters. It was still an extraordinary distance, still a shot that fewer than 200 people in the military could reliably make. But now it meant something different than it had before. Not just a measure of skill, but a symbol of refusing to hide, of stepping forward when staying seated would have been safer, of trusting that excellence would eventually find its proper recognition, even if the path to that recognition was dangerous and uncertain. She pulled into the parking lot of the apartment complex where she now lived under her real name, no longer hiding behind cover identities or administrative obscurity. The building was ordinary, middle class, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other casually but did not pry into private business. It was not glamorous, but it was honest, which felt like an appropriate foundation for whatever came next. Inside her apartment, she found a package waiting, delivered earlier that day, according to the timestamp. The return address was Fort Bridger. She opened it carefully and found a shadow box containing a military medal she had earned in Syria but never received. The accompanying note was from General Harwick. This belonged to you 3 years ago. It should have been presented then with proper ceremony and recognition. Consider this a small correction to a much larger injustice. Your courage on that firing range changed more than you know. You reminded us all that excellence cannot stay hidden forever, and that sometimes the most important shot is the one that reveals truth rather than eliminating a target. Vera placed the shadow box on the shelf where it caught the light from the window. She stared at it for a long moment, thinking about the teammates who should have received similar recognition, but never would. Odom, Quan, Washington. They had died following orders, trusting a system that had betrayed them. The justice system had punished the officers responsible, but no verdict could return what had been taken. What she would do, was ensure their sacrifice meant something. She would work with Senator Whitmore to protect other operators from similar betrayals. She would use her experience and skills to identify problems before they became tragedies. She would refuse to be silent when silence enabled corruption. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part or character. Maybe you have witnessed someone in your own life show unexpected strength when it mattered most. Share your experiences with the community. Stories like these remind us that courage comes in many forms, and sometimes the bravest thing we can do is refuse to stay invisible when the world expects us to disappear. The sun was setting outside her window, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of distant horizons and places she had served. She had traveled far from that firing range at Fort Bridger, both literally and figuratively. The journey had been dangerous and painful, and had required sacrifices she still processed in quiet moments alone. But she had survived. She had spoken truth that needed speaking. She had helped bring justice to people who had operated without accountability for too long. And she had learned that sometimes the shot that changes everything is not the one that hits a distant target, but the one that forces you to step into the light and claim your identity regardless of who might be watching. For 1,000 meters, one perfect shot, the distance between hiding and revelation, between silence and truth, between who she pretended to be and who she actually was. It had seemed like such a simple challenge when General Harwick issued it. Hit the target and prove your skill. But the real challenge had been everything that followed. The investigation and the testimony and the decision to stop running and start fighting for something larger than personal survival. She had made that shot. She had met that challenge. And whatever came next, she would face it the same way. With precision, with courage, and with absolute refusal to pretend she was anything less than the operator she had been trained to be. Ghost 7 had come out of the shadows, and she was not going back.